2 years ago, shortly after me and my girlfriend got the keys to our first ever home, I finally built my dream koi pond. My dad helped out here and there, and seeing it all come together set him on a mission. To outdo my pond by completely rebuilding his one, determined to make it bigger and more spectacular than mine. This isn't just a simple makeover. The old pond is being stripped back and reinvented from the ground up, replaced by a completely new system that's easier to maintain, full of natural planting, gentle streams, and a dedicated area for wildlife, where frogs, newts and birds can thrive alongside the koi, a space that feels as though it has always been part of the garden. This was the first pond that I ever built, a 14,000 litre system that my dad and I put together about 10 years ago. For how little we knew back then, we did a pretty decent job, but this rebuild is going to take things to a whole new level. Like the pond at my own house, the rebuild will blend the beauty of a water garden with rocks, plants, waterfalls and smaller wildlife ponds, with koi specific features such as advanced filtration, high flow rates and excellent aeration. The pond isn't just about appearance. It's home to koi, goldfish and shabunkin. Over time, we've rescued fish from neglected ponds, some suffering from bloat, dropsy, bacterial infections and even fin rot. Every infectious fish was treated before joining the pond, though some never fully recovered from the bloat and others still bear the marks of historical fin rot. So to keep this thriving community healthy, we'll be using a Burton's drum filter for the mechanical filtration, a homemade biological filter and a heavily planted wetland area that will also provide a large haven for wildlife before flowing into waterfalls and a stream that returns to the main pond. But before we can start any of this, there are a few important things that we need to do first. So this is where the game of chess begins. Before we can even start the pond, we have to take out this fencing back here, move it back as far as we can so we can level out the area. We can then build half of the summer house up to there, which will then give us enough room so we can then empty everything out of the garage into the summer house. So then we can remove the garage and then we can get started with the pond rebuild. So obviously a lot of things to do first before we can even make a start with the pond. The fence that's here now is still in decent shape, but we're moving it back to make more room for the summer house and the filter shed. Because there's a footpath running right behind the garden, we're going with 6-foot close board panels on top of 6-inch composite gravel boards just to give us a bit more privacy. For the postwork, we're using Dura posts. They're galvanised steel, powder coated and come with a 25-year guarantee, so they should outlast anything else that we could have put in. This end of the garden used to be a raised flower bed with some holly trees that never really took off. To get it ready for the summer house, we'll need to level it with the lawn. I've hired a 1-ton digger to make life easier, especially for pulling out the old Leylandii stumps from trees that we cut down about 10 years ago. In the existing build, there are 2 filtration systems. One is a skimmer going into a vortex, going into a pressure filter, back to the pond. The other is 2 easy pods. This system worked really well in the beginning, making it extremely easy to keep crystal clear, healthy water. But as the fish grew and spawned, the system started to struggle. Keeping up with the maintenance became harder, and before long, it just wasn't able to deliver the same clear, healthy water that was once really easy to achieve. With the pond no longer looking its best, we decided to bring the drum filter in early. Running it alongside the old system gave us a chance to clear things up before the rebuild, in the hopes of making the messy job of dismantling everything slightly cleaner. Over the next few weeks, we let the drum filter do its job clearing the pond while we got started on the shed. The idea was to eventually have 2. One of them to finally give Dad enough space for his tools and projects, and another to serve as a dedicated filter house for the pond. Since the original pond had attracted so much wildlife, I decided to take down sections of the waterfall and habitats gradually, giving all the wildlife a chance to move on naturally by their own accord, rather than wiping everything out with a digger in one go. The timing actually worked out in our favour. Being early spring, the ground was still heavily waterlogged, and we would have wanted to wait for it to dry out before digging anyway. Otherwise, the whole area would have just turned into an uncontrollable mess. While we waited a few more weeks for the weather to improve, we started getting the garden organised for the upcoming chaos. We also made the shed watertight, which meant we could finally empty and dismantle the garage. And surprisingly, that didn't actually take that long at all. With all the preparation work done, all we could do now was wait. A moment to catch our breath before the real work began. As spring arrived, the ground started to dry out, the pond warmed up, and it was time to get back to work. The next job was to build a DIY biological filter for the temporary pond, where the fish would be staying during the rebuild. We kept it simple, just a large tub of plastic media.
Forgot about that.
The idea was to feed the fish lightly during this period to keep their digestion easy and their stress levels down while everything else was being torn apart around them. So the filtration setup here really didn't need to be anything fancy. To make the move as gentle as possible, we filled the temporary pond with water from the main pond, keeping it all consistent. Two of the good nets annoyingly broke straight away, so we had to switch to the spares, which weren't quite as suitable.
Piece of shit.
This made catching the fish take quite a bit longer than planned. Especially as it turns out there were way more fish than we realised. We couldn't believe how many dark goldfish there actually were. They'd been camouflaged against the liner and the dark rocks this whole time. With every last fish safely moved, the DIY filter in place, the cover secured, and the pond drained, it was finally time. The digger rolled in, and from that moment on, the carnage began. The next step was demolishing the pond. Every rock, every pebble, carefully stacked to reuse later before pulling out the old liner. Sounds simple enough, until we realised we weren't just clearing rocks anymore. Every flip of a stone revealed another little green body, and every fold of a liner seemed to hide a pair of curious eyes. Frogs were everywhere, hopping, leaping, and turning what should have been a nice easy clear out into a full-blown wildlife circus. One by one, we moved them to the other end of the garden. And then another.
There's a frog here.
And another. Soon, it became obvious we were dealing with hundreds of them. Over 200 frogs by the time we stopped counting, which was insane considering we'd only ever seen a handful in the garden before. In the end, we hadn't just cleared a pond. We'd orchestrated the migration of half of Britain's frog population. With the frogs safely relocated and the rocks and liner cleared, we could at last turn our attention to reshaping the pond. This was slightly different to the other pond builds I'd done in the past, as most of the pond was already dug. Instead, it was about reshaping it to suit the new garden design, opening it up, making it flow better and giving it a smoother feel, while still making it bigger overall. We also wanted the lily shelves to be deeper this time, a lesson learnt the hard way from the original design. Shallow shelves had made it easy for a heron to get over the electric fence and land in the water, which, let's just say, didn't end well for some of the fish. As we dug, the earth went to the back of the garden, piled neatly where it could later be lifted by a grab lorry from the road behind. Rather than me loading each wheelbarrow for my dad to dump at the back, we changed the approach. I tracked every scoop of earth myself, taking it straight to the pile, while my dad could get on with other parts of the pond. It was a small change, but it kept the workflow smooth and saved a lot of unnecessary running around. Now that the digging was done, the garden looked unrecognisable. What once resembled a pond now looked more like an excavation site. Rocks, soil, and even bits of the garage scattered across what used to be a patio and lawn. Piles of earth towered at the back, and the whole place looked completely chaotic. But to us, it meant one thing: progress. With the groundwork finished, the next step, laying down the underlay and liner, marked the turning point, where we'd finally start transforming the chaos back into a pond. The liner itself was about 100 kilos, which isn't the worst thing to lift between the two of us, but because it had no rigidity to it and it was just floppy, it was an absolute nightmare to handle. At the shop, it took 3 of us and a forklift just to get it in the back of the car. Before laying the liner though, we laid the underlay. This is to help protect the liner from anything underground, such as sharp roots or bits of stone that we may have missed. Over time, the weight of the water will put pressure on the earth, which may help protrude these sharp objects towards the liner. Ideally, you want to go for something that's 250 grams per square metre or thicker. After a bit of confusion as to what way the liner was folded, we got it laid and then worked towards pushing the liner into all the corners of the pond walls, making sure that after the liner has all the slack taken out of it, there would still be a good overhang on all of the sides. We have just had, he is now leaving, all the stones turn up. There should be 8 pallets in total, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There we go. Got 2 pallets of the bigger rocks, 400 to 600 mil, so they'll go nicely as feature pieces. And then we've got a lot of, I think we've got 3 lots of smaller rocks and 3 lots of slightly larger rocks. Anyway, all different sizes. We purposely went for the Cambrian boulders because they're smooth. Obviously if we get any sharp stones or anything like that, I mean there are a few that are kind of a bit pointy, we'll be positioning them in a way that the fish won't be kind of cutting themselves or anything if they start flashing or rubbing up against the rocks. So the Cambrian boulders are really good in that sense that they are really round and smooth. With the liner stretched out and the shape of the pond finally visible, the focus shifted to the mountain of rocks waiting nearby. Hundreds of them, ready to be placed one by one, each helping to bring the pond back to life. We started with the bottom layer, the rocks from the old pond. They weren't as pretty as the new Cambrian boulders, but buried deep beneath the water, covered in a film of natural algae, you'd never notice the difference. The biggest stones went down first, anchoring everything in place and giving the pond its backbone. Halfway up the walls, we built in a ledge, a small but important detail. It means that all of the rocks won't just sit stacked directly on top of each other, and instead, each layer will rest slightly further back, creating that natural outward lean. The result is a shape that feels like it's formed over time, not built by hand. To make sure the rockwork was strong and stable, we stopped after the first few layers and gave it a few days to settle. Then, once we were confident it was holding firm, we rocked up the rest, gave it another day or so, and then locked it all together with pond foam, the final touch to make sure it's solid. At first glance, the foam really doesn't look great. Rough, uneven, and standing out against the rockwork. The excess will be cut away and the gaps filled with smaller pebbles, giving the rock walls that natural, seamless finish. Since we still had the digger on hand, we decided to make use of it and move the massive log besides the pond. The idea was to turn it into a natural seating area, something that would blend into the garden rather than stand out. It turned out to be a lot trickier than expected, even with the digger's help, but we got there in the end. Right now, it still looks pretty rough, but once the landscaping's done and the plants and bushes are in, it should start to feel like it's always been part of the garden. With the rebuild in full swing, it was important to remember to keep a close eye on the temporary pond. Regular checks made sure the fish were comfortable, the water stayed healthy, and everything was running as it should. Because of delivery delays, the fish were going to be in their temporary pond far longer than we first expected. With the heat starting to rise, we were starting to get concerned about oxygen levels. In a small, overstocked setup like this, oxygenation is crucial. If the oxygen levels drop, the fish might only last a few hours. So to stay ahead of this, we added a Halier air pump with a built-in battery, capable of running up to 8 hours during a power cut. It was a small addition, but in these conditions, it could easily mean the difference between the fish thriving and the situation turning serious. Feeding required just as much care. In a compact pond, water parameters can change rapidly, so choosing a highly digestible food with minimal fillers was essential. For my pond, I've been using Nutrimare with great success, and for the temporary pond, I went one step further and used Nutrimare's sensitive range, which is slightly lower in protein to reduce digestive strain and with extra herbal health enhancers to support immune function. Every precaution mattered in this temporary setup. One wrong move could upset the delicate balance and put the fish under unnecessary stress, or even worse. With the fish settled and the temporary pond running smoothly, our focus shifted back to the build. This time to the part that would transform the garden into a true wildlife haven. The plan was to create a secondary wildlife pond and waterfall that would link everything together into one flowing ecosystem where fish, wildlife and plants could all thrive. The process for building it was similar to how we built the main pond, just on a smaller, more delicate scale. We started by digging a shallow basin and used the displaced earth to raise the surrounding ground, giving it just enough elevation for the water to flow naturally towards the main pond. Key here was subtle height. Enough to make the stream work, but not so much that it looked man-made. We used the exit stone, where the water would spill from the wildlife pond, as our guide for the final water level, leaving a few extra inches to play it safe to allow for the ground settling. When we built the original pond almost a decade ago, we thought we needed a steep slope to make the waterfall look right. But, in my experience since I've built many other waterfalls, I've come to the conclusion that gentle slopes and gradual drops generally look far more natural and blend seamlessly into the landscape. Also, the steep slope made maintaining the landscape around it tricky to do, often having to step in the stream and on occasions, almost falling into the pond. Foam was also used throughout the waterfall, not just to hold the rocks firmly in place, but also to control the direction of the flow. Without it, much of the water would disappear through the small gaps between the rocks rather than flowing over them, losing that visual effect of a continuous natural cascade. Because the water is going to be running through a drum filter and an upflow static bed filter before reaching the wildlife pond, almost all the physical waste is removed beforehand. Over time, a small amount will still make it through to the wildlife pond, but with the sheer amount of plants that will eventually be in this smaller pond breaking down any remaining waste, it's nothing to worry about. The balance between filtration and nature should quite easily take care of itself at this level. For that reason, the base of this pond is kept simple. Just a layer of pebbles across the floor, with no underfloor flow, letting it settle into a more natural, self-sustaining rhythm. There are snorkel wetland filtration systems out there. Some of you may have heard of them, that allow for slightly more efficient cleaning, but in my view, having a really solid mechanical filtration before the bog is a far more effective approach. With my dad's system, I can still get a sump pump right down to the base of the wildlife pond beneath the pebbles if I ever want to backflush the system. It might not be quite as efficient cleaning as a snorkel system, but it achieves similar results without the extra build complexity. When I built my pond, I had quite a few people commenting saying that I'd wasted my money on filtration, claiming a well-designed bog or wetland filter alone was more than enough. And in certain situations, they're right. If you've got only a handful of goldfish and aren't really feeding them that heavily, and also have a huge bog relative to the size of your pond, that kind of system can absolutely thrive. I've built some successful systems just utilising a wetland as the filtration. But my plans were a bit different. I've always intended to have well over 10 koi, feed them reasonably heavy so they grow big, and space for a large bog area just wasn't an option. With that kind of demand, there's simply no chance that the system could ever rely on a bog alone, not unless I turn the entire garden into a wetland. With the waterfall taking shape, it was time to focus on how the main pond itself would function, both practically and visually. That's where the suction grid comes in. One of the main reasons I decided to go down this route was for the natural aesthetic. A suction grid lets you create that stream bed look with smooth round pebbles, giving the base of the pond a much more natural feel compared to the typical pond design with bare walls and exposed drains. There's absolutely nothing wrong with those kind of setups. They're incredibly efficient and often the best choice for certain types of ponds. But that just wasn't the look that my dad wanted here. A suction grid is essentially a network of perforated pipes laid across the bottom of the pond, hidden beneath a layer of round pebbles. The pipes are connected to a pump, which creates negative pressure and draws water down through the gaps in between the stones. As the water's pulled through, it takes fine debris, fish waste and uneaten food with it, channeling everything into the pipework and off to the filter system. Because the suction is spread evenly across the pond floor rather than concentrated in one spot, you get gentle, consistent movement that should prevent dead spots along the floor. And the best part, no visible drains or fittings breaking up the natural look. This system can even work in gravity-fed setups like in my pond and in airlift setups too. But for me, a pump-fed design makes the most sense here, as it provides stronger suction, which helps pull the waste into the filters more effectively, and it also allows me to reverse the flow to backflush the grid if I ever need to clear it. Back in the 90s, systems like this were actually quite popular, but they had a bad reputation for clogging up. That was mainly because people used small gravel, which compacted over time. With round pebbles, at least 20mm in size, that problem is almost entirely avoided. But still, a lot of people today assume that suction grids block up easily, simply because they weren't built properly decades ago. So, while the system's probably not suitable for a heavily stocked, high-performance koi pond where the goal is maximum growth and constant heavy feeding, for most ponds, especially where looks matter just as much as function, a well-built suction grid is a brilliant option. It keeps the setup clean, efficient and completely natural looking, blending modern filtration with a design that feels like it truly belongs in the landscape. At this stage, the project was really starting to come together. The chaos of digging and rockwork was behind us, and for the first time, you could finally picture what the finished space would feel like. The whole project was slowly transforming from chaos into something timeless. A man-made pond that looks like a piece of nature itself. One of the biggest finishing touches was sorting out the edges, creating a seamless transition between the pond and the surrounding garden and hiding away any sign of liner. There are a few ways to do this, but my go-to method is to find stones that naturally fit the space, lift the liner and shape the ground so that the tops of the rocks will sit just above the future waterline. Ideally, for the most part, the edge stones should be fairly smooth or flat across the top, sitting at a consistent height that blends into the rest of the garden. It's important to leave enough liner tucked behind them, raised slightly above the waterline and allowing for any ground settling. Any bits that show can easily be hidden later with pebbles, bark or planting. This stage of the build is always one of my favourites. It's quick, satisfying, and the transformation in just a few short hours is unreal. Even without the water, the pond starts to feel alive. The edges soften, the shape makes sense, and you can finally see how it's going to blend into the garden as if it's always been there. After weeks of chaos, it was finally time to fill the pond and give it life. The fish had been waiting long enough in their cramped temporary setup, and the moment had come to make the place ready for them. We fitted a water meter to keep track of exactly how much water went in it. At first, we'd somehow managed to install it the wrong way round. Not exactly the best start, but after flipping it, we couldn't help watching the numbers climb, trying to guess where it would stop. The old system held around 14,000 litres, so anything beyond that felt like an achievement. By the next day, the water had crept right up to the brim, and to our joy, the water meter was reading just over 18,000 litres, and that was only the pond itself, not even the rest of the system. As the pond filled, everything started to make sense. The rocks, the curves, the textures, they all came to life once the water wrapped around them. Because the water was still murky from all the rocks and pebbles, we temporarily added the drum filter by the wildlife pond. We placed it here so we could see the waterfall running for the first time. It was incredible. The water cascading over the stones instantly breathed more life into the space. We also added an air bar underneath the waterfall for extra aeration. Its placement was deliberate. It makes the waterfall appear more powerful and lively, enhances the surface movement, and does so in a way that still feels natural, avoiding bubbles scattered randomly across the pond, which wouldn't happen in a real stream. What had been a construction site for months suddenly looked like it had meaning. Like the garden had finally started to find its balance again. With the pumps fired up, the main filters in place and water cascading through the wildlife pond and down the stream and waterfall, it was time to bring the second half of the setup to life. The intake bay. This part of the system isn't so much about heavy filtration, but more about keeping the surface clean and the water gently moving, giving the pond that constant sense of life and motion. I'd never actually built an intake bay before, so this was a completely experimental setup, especially with the limited space we had to work with. To make sure I wasn't wasting time building the whole thing only to find out it didn't work, I took it step by step, testing at each stage carefully to ensure we were actually pulling water from the surface. The main stone, where the water flows over, needed the most attention. Too shallow and leaves would just sit there, blocking the pull. Too deep and it wouldn't skim the surface at all. There was quite a bit of trial and error, moving stones and adjusting angles, but having a VariFlow pump made all the difference as we could tweak the flow until it was just right. Test number 1 of the world's smallest intake bay. In the end, it worked really well. It's not quite as effective as a mechanical skimmer, but once I blocked off the other intake routes, it quietly kept the surface clean, pulling debris steadily off the pond surface and giving the pond a subtle, gentle movement that felt just right. While we were sorting out the pond edges, we were also finalising our order for the large decking area, which was always meant to be placed in the same location as before, overhanging the left side of the pond. However, progress slowed down for a few weeks due to work and other commitments, and during that time, my dad got quite attached to the pond shape. He believed that decking one whole side would make the pond look smaller and that it would lose the impressive wow factor from having such a large body of water. Now I could not agree less, and to be honest, it really annoyed me, because if I'd have known we were doing this from the start, there would have been various aspects of the pond I would have designed differently for efficiency reasons. After a bit of back and forth on this, one day when I wasn't there, he started adding rocks along the edge so it's easier to visualise how it would look once complete, and unfortunately, he was right. It does look much better than it would have with the decking. He was totally right about the pond size being such a big part of what makes it really stand out. So because of this last minute change of plan, I wasn't able to plan this area to be part of a suction grid or a wetland filter or something else that would help minimise dead spots. So we just simply pointed the pump pipe from the world's smallest intake bay to make sure that there's still some water movement there. You win this one, Dad. Once we decided the pond was ready and safe enough for fish, we moved the drum filter from its temporary location to its permanent location, along with the DIY biofilter that we were using for the temporary pond. Although the filter shed wasn't quite finished, or anywhere near finished, we were starting to get nervous about how long the fish had been in their small temporary setup and were eager to get them in their more spacious, more filtered, permanent home. In the few days leading up to this, as well as testing the pond water, I used a sump pump to move some water from the main pond to the temporary pond and vice versa. I did this in small amounts multiple times over a few days to make the water as similar as possible to minimise any chance of shock and stress when moving the fish. At the moment, the pond is still a little cloudy, but the water's ready and so are we. After all the graft, all the planning and every small win along the way, it's time for the moment that we've been waiting for. The fish are finally moving in to their forever home. The plan is every fish once caught will have a quick physical health assessment to double check that they haven't picked up any illnesses in the temporary pond. And every single koi will be put into the measuring bowl to also measure, regardless of how big
56.
or how small it is.
28. Got an absolute monster here. So usually if they're a bit zany, that's kind of signs of stress.
The biggest koi my dad has never been fed heavily for growth or even measured, but we're still hoping that today it will measure somewhere close to 60 centimetres.
Sixty cm. Might actually be a bit more, to be fair. Nice.
Seeing the fish finally swimming in the pond was a massive weight off our shoulders, but there was no time to slow down because the clock was still ticking. With my dad's huge barbecue coming up quickly and an overwhelming amount still to do, the relief quickly turned into urgency. From a distance, it feels like we're nearly done. Yet when you tally up all the small tasks still waiting, it's clear that every day counts, and none of them can be wasted. Since completing the rockwork, which seems like a lifetime ago, we started to add some plants here and there when we had a spare 5 minutes. Fortunately, we managed to save a lot of plants from the old pond, including water lilies, iris and arum lilies. We placed some lily pads in the wildlife pond to help provide shade, since this area doesn't get any from trees. We also added a few around the edges to break up the long stretches of rock visually, but made sure to keep them clear of the waterfall and intake bay so they don't interfere with the flow. Water iris grow really quickly and their thick rhizome root systems can be a nightmare to manage, but because of that rapid growth, they're also excellent at absorbing nutrients like nitrates, which will help clean the water and combat algae. So we definitely still want them in the system. That's why we place them right at the back of the wildlife pond, well away from any flow, in the hope that we won't have to deal with them too often. We also planted many different varieties of normal ground plants around and in the edges to help further visually break up the constant rockwork. With the original pond, one of the things we didn't like was that we planted many tall plants on the accessible side of the pond, which meant they were essentially in the middle of the garden. This made it feel like they were blocking the view and cutting the space in half, so the layout felt awkward and a bit messy. This time, the vast majority of the edge plants are going to be a lot lower, so this gives the space a much more open plan feel. But there will still be some plants, mainly towards the edge of the garden, that will grow up to 1/2 metre, just enough to add some height and variation, and a more natural layered look without the space feeling closed in. One of the last things to do for the pond, before the big barbecue, alongside the enormous amount of garden work, is to dig the trench for the pipe that feeds the filter. It starts at the pump that's pulling from the suction grid and is located out of sight underneath the decking, which we have fitted with an auto top-up for filling up the pond to the correct height automatically, and a float switch, so if there's a leak in the pipework, the pump will automatically switch off to prevent it emptying the pond. From the pump, it goes underground, out of sight, out of mind, to the filter house. The first filter is a mechanical filter, which is a Burton's drum filter. These bits of kit are amazing because they automatically remove waste by passing the pond water through a fine mesh drum. As the 60 micron mesh clogs with debris, the system automatically triggers a cleaning cycle that rotates the drum and sprays off the waste into a separate drain. This means the filter is self-cleaning without requiring almost any maintenance. After the drum is a large DIY static media filter, filled with 200 litres total of various plastic filter media. This acts as a biological filter, where beneficial bacteria grow on the media and break down harmful ammonia and nitrite from fish waste into less harmful nitrate, helping to maintain healthy, stable water quality. Also, with it being static, it will trap some fines that have managed to get past the drum filter, which will also help make the water clearer. When we want to clean this, what we will do is simply open a valve on the outlet to waste, agitate the media with an air pump so the waste will fall off the media, go through the filter outlet and end up to waste. The pond might now be finished, but the whole garden definitely isn't. Now comes the real chaos. We've got 2-3 days to turn this war zone into a garden again. We've got decking to finish, a shed to finish, a lawn to dig out, topsoil and turf, all in one weekend. After this, we've only got a few evenings spare to clear up all the mess and clean the patio. Tools are everywhere. Offcuts, dust, mud, all of it needs sorting, because next Saturday is the big barbecue. Friends, family, everyone turning up expecting to see this lovely new pond and garden, and hopefully not the chaos that's currently surrounding it. It's a huge ask, as we're still so far away. But we've come this far, and there's no turning back now. It just has to come together in time. From an ageing pond on its last legs to a thriving, living landscape, everything has led to this moment. The pond now sits complete, calm, natural, and full of life. What started as an old pond that's outgrown its surroundings has become a true wildlife haven, already attracting birds, insects, and life of all kinds. After all the planning, effort, and late nights, seeing it finished has made it all worthwhile. My dad is absolutely ecstatic with how it's turned out, and it couldn't have come at a better time. Just as he begins his retirement, he's now got the perfect place to sit back and enjoy it. If there's anything that you're curious about, the filtration setup, the design choices, or how the system runs, leave a comment below. I'll make sure to reply to every single question. It's been months of hard work, long days, and plenty of challenges. But seeing it all come to life and being able to share it with you is something truly special. Thank you for being part of this journey. This is only just the beginning.